Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, I guess. We're going to give people a minute or two, and we're going to set up on Facebook Live, and then we'll come back and officially start. Carlette, should we get going?
Yeah, it is streaming on Facebook. I see it.
Okay. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Aqua Porter, and I am one of the co-chairs for the City of Rochester RUBI Committee, which is the Reparations and Universal Basic Income Committee. I am also serving as the co-chair for the Universal Basic Income Subcommittee, along with Gina Cruz, who, due to a family emergency, is unable to be with us tonight. And I am joined by two members of the UBI Subcommittee, Larry Knox and Nicole Hushlery. Today, our community forum webinar will also be live streamed on Facebook. And we want to start by thanking you for joining us today. Our agenda today is, let's see here if I can get this going. Our agenda today is pretty basic and simple. We're going to talk about cash benefits, cash transfer, and there are a couple of terminologies that are out there. One is UBI, which is Universal Basic Income, and the other big concept is GBI, which is Guaranteed Basic Income. And as we get into our conversation, Larry Knox is going to talk about UBI versus GBI. We are also going to talk about eligibility for these programs, a little bit about some thoughts about what our subcommittee is thinking about proposing, and most of the conversation we would love today to be to get thoughts, feedback, and discussion and dialogue with the community. So we want you to start to think about your questions and to use the Q&A feature if you're on the Zoom webinar, and the comment feature if you're on Facebook Live. We will have someone monitoring both of those, and we'll ask those questions on your behalf to the panel, and we will do our best to answer the questions. If we don't answer your question, or somehow we don't have enough time to, or we don't have the answer, we're going to ask you for your email so that we can get back to you when we do have an answer. And if there are any questions that were sent in advance, we're going to ask Carlette to make sure that she shares those in advance. So we are excited to be here with you today. As I said, it's our we are anticipating a good dialogue and discussion with the community. Although we have some thoughts, we really know that this work is really community driven, and it's really important that you are a part of the decisions that we're making on behalf of Rochester and the work going forward. So with that, I'm going to go to, I think we talked about housekeeping. If you have, this is going to be recorded. It is being recorded, and it will be available on the rockruby.com site later. If you have questions, like I said, please use the Q&A feature on Zoom, and use the comment features on Facebook Live. Carlette, are there any questions that I should know about before I get started?
Not at this time.
Okay. So I really want to talk to you about how this committee was formed. Mayor Warren wanted to really address some of the disparities in our city. And so she invited an exploratory committee that she charged with looking at existing UBI pilots in other cities, reparation pilots, and home ownership mortgage programs to see if there were some ideas that we could bring to Rochester to consider. And so she at the same time had joined the Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, and she stood with mayors from across the country who shared this vision. You might have heard of cities like Oakland, California, Stockton, Evanston, Illinois, who have already made some of these ideas a reality. And so we are using some of their lessons and learning from their successes and from some of their challenges to propose a basic income program or pilot for Rochester. Our committee here is composed, well, look, let me go back 1 second. So the bigger committee around RUBI has two co-chairs. One is Brittany Wells, who is his city's chief of staff, and Chief Equity Officer, Dr. Cephas Archie. And I joined them as a committee facilitator, as the executive director of our MAPI, the Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative. The full committee was broken into 3 subcommittees. The UBI subcommittee includes Gina Cruz, Larry Knox, Nicole Hushler-Ree, Tremaine Harris, Stanley Martin, Mercedes Phelan, and we have been working for about 3.5 months or so to understand what is going on in the rest of the country, what UBI and GBI means, and understanding what ideas we might have for Rochester. The actual charge of the UBI committee was to develop a pilot, to educate the community around UBI, and to gather community input, and then to propose a policy resolution for the mayor that she could review and decide to take to City Council. We are working on proposing a scalable pilot that is informed by lessons learned from other cities, but also designed with Rochester residents in mind and aligned to the RAISE recommendations that were produced and shared earlier this year. We were asked to include in our recommendation what population would be impacted, what the cost of a pilot might be, what number of people would we serve, what the eligibility criteria for the program would be and any program requirements, how we would measure and assess the process, and then a timeline and implementation process. And so that is the work that we are undertaking as we speak. And as we said, one of the important things that we want to talk about is getting the community's input, thoughts, and feedback on UBI, as well as trying to provide a little bit of information about what UBI and GBI is. So with that, I'm going to pause for a moment, see if there are any questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Larry Knox, who is going to talk about universal basic income and guaranteed basic income. Carlette, any questions?
No.
Aqua, you do have there are a couple folks in the chat asking if we can make the slides larger.
I think they might be on speaker view. You might go upper right hand corner and change your view to standard, and the slide should be bigger and the speakers and the speaker smaller.
Yeah, and go full screen.
Yep.
Yeah, because on my screen they show up full size, so I don't know if there's anything that I can do on my side.
I think it's upper right corner, hit view, hit standard and full screen.
Okay, Carla, you said there was nothing that we needed to address right now?
No, they mentioned it.
Okay, I'm gonna then turn this over to Larry. And Larry, if you could take us through basic income and guaranteed income. And I am gonna be your slide changer, so just let me know.
Yep, thanks. All right, so there's two of the larger ideas in regards to what we're talking about in regards to income for people is universal basic income and guaranteed basic income. You may have heard those terms. They're similar but not exactly the same. And our committee has kind of looked at both ideas, and we're going to go through what both are, and then talk about why we're leaning towards one as opposed to the other. And then obviously love to hear the community's thoughts on that. Next slide. So universal basic income, everybody is eligible. So it's all populations, everybody that's usually 18 or over is qualified. It's a recurring payment of some sort, either monthly or yearly, and there's no income requirement. So as long as you are 18 and over, you could qualify, or 16 over depending. You can qualify for the payment. So there aren't any restrictions. Everybody gets it, no matter their economic status. Next slide. So guaranteed basic income's a lot more focused. It's also economic relief like the universal basic income, but it goes to targeted populations. So you're saying we would be saying, as in other places, this is the universe of people that are eligible for this guaranteed basic income. Typically, they go at it's directed. The first line of who's eligible is people that are at or below certain poverty levels. We'll go a little bit more into detail later about what poverty levels that we are considering. It's a limited time disbursement because we're doing this as a pilot. Obviously, we love to fund this for forever, but we're thinking of a year or two as the pilot, and then hopefully other streams of revenue, which we'll talk about later, will come in to help keep it going. Now, so that would be the same with universal, but the cost would be a lot more because it'd be everybody as opposed to targeted population, which is what our pilot would be doing. And also, there's no strings attached to how a recipient spends the money in our proposal. Some proposals have that you spend money and we want you to pay it certain things. It has to go towards RG&E, or it has to go towards food, and there's restrictions, which is often what happens when you get money from the DSS, from the state or federal government. Sometimes you get money that's only could be used in a certain way, or resources that are going to be used in a certain way. But the money is, you can use it any way you want. There's no strings attached to it. People who qualify and who get the money every month or every year, depending how it comes out, can use it for whatever purposes they feel are necessary for their household. Next slide. So we've talked about the poverty levels that we want to concentrate on in the city of Rochester. And obviously, this is the city of Rochester program, so you have to be a city of Rochester resident to qualify for this pilot. Maybe there might be talks of towns or counties doing it at some point, but anybody that qualifies or that would be taking part in this would have to be a city resident. So we've talked about people 200% and under of the federal poverty level would be the ones that could qualify. That'd be the first tier qualification for the program. And 200% of poverty level, family of four that makes $53,000 or less. That's kind of like an idea of approximately where you're at. So, and then we're thinking of 25% of the people that would be in the program would be within that sphere of poverty. 100 to 150%, which is a lower, higher poverty, 25%, and the lowest poverty levels, under 100% of the poverty level, federal poverty level, at least half. Our goal would be to have at least half the participants in the pilot be in that amount of poverty. Obviously, the numbers aren't going to be 100%. Well, we'll have 100% of people within some of those, but we're not necessarily going to hit necessarily the goals of 50, 25, 25, but that's what we're going to be trying to do to have the program be a success. Next slide. So examples of eligibility, and there's a lot of back and forth discussions we've had on this, and this is where we're at for the moment. So the idea would be it'd be $500 a month to 500 people or 500 households, as I think we've also talked about. So it's not, there could be 3 or 4 adults in a household. Wouldn't necessarily be everybody getting it. Potentially, our idea is that it'd be per household for 1 year, and that would start. Obviously, it wouldn't be this year, but hopefully next year that program would start as we get people eligible. Okay, you must be a City of Rochester resident. 200% of the poverty level, and the ages that we're thinking of focusing on are ages 16 to 35 and single parents. So those are some of the main qualifications that we want to get into. The questions you may have: well, what's the 16-year-old? Why would they be able to qualify for this? If you go to the fifth, second line, the first square there, teen head of households or teens that are just getting out of foster care. So we're thinking of teens that are emancipated, that out on their own. So if you're just 16 and you're just staying at a friend's house and not with your family, you wouldn't qualify. But if somebody who's legally on their own or is head of household on their own, at the age of 16 or above, we wouldn't want them to be able to qualify also potentially for the program. And we definitely want to do a focus on single parents. And the reason we had talked about the younger age range is that we're trying to stop that cycle of poverty, and the sooner that you can stop it, the sooner that you can address it, the less likely it will become a multi-year or longer term process. Obviously, there's people that are in poverty of all ages, and but we want to focus on younger people that are just getting are in poverty and hopefully aren't as far into poverty that we can help bring them out of it quicker with this pilot, with concentrating on that age range. Also, formerly incarcerated individuals we want to focus on as people reentry back into society. Obviously, it's even with some of the new laws where you can't ask about people's criminal records, it is still hard to get a job and to get your own income. We know this is even tougher in COVID right now. So we want to definitely concentrate on people that are formerly incarcerated to help them, have other sources of income to help build them out of poverty and move forward without going through some of the issues that brought them into being incarcerated. Also, homeless individuals and families, obviously, we want to concentrate on, especially as people are getting other kinds of support and help. We do want to make sure that people that are homeless and individual families have this extra money on top of what they are getting. I'm not sure if there's another slide, and grandparents also. So they obviously, now there are grandparents that are 35 or 34 or younger that could qualify, but we are also thinking of somebody who's could be a single parent or a single caregiver who's older and maybe a grandparent or aunt that's taking care of a child, and that could be somebody that we also suggest that is qualified to have a higher chance of getting in the pilot. Next slide. Okay. Actually, well, I'm sorry. Can we go back to the last slide? I just had one thing that we've also talked about for eligibility, and one thing that we've going to have to work with a lot of our agencies on in the county in the city is the benefit cliff. And one thing that we don't want to happen is as we give people extra income, they could potentially lose services that they qualify for because that is considered, this could be considered extra income. For example, if you qualify for food stamps or different kinds of aid or qualify for different housing support programs, you could, have a certain amount of income, but if you're getting $500 more a month, you could lose maybe $900 in housing credit or $1,000 in food stamps. Obviously, that wouldn't make sense, and we wouldn't want that to happen. So that's something that also we're going to consider, and there is a committee here locally that's working on that. That's something that's statewide. That's an issue that's being looked at, and we figure out a way, and we're going to work with our partners in government to figure out a way to not have this hurt people who are getting other help as they're moving out of poverty. Okay. So this chart shows red is New York State. If you look on the left-hand side, Black African American families, the rates are pretty high for poverty. United States is 66%. New York State is in red. The region's blue. Monroe County yellow. Rochester's in the black. The highest rates right there for Latino, Hispanic, Black African American, white. All very high rates of poverty from the ACT Rochester report. So our pilot, I mean, it's not race-based, but it is off of, we were going to go into, our idea that we talked about was concentrating on the highest poverty areas of the city and doing some of the recruitment or trying to get the largest amounts of people in the pilot that are in the highest poverty areas where the concentration of poverty is worse. There's certain zip codes and census tracts that we'll be able to get with new census tract data to figure out where is the poverty the highest, where's the largest concentration of it, and trying to make sure we have a lot of applicants and people that we are helping with this program that are in those areas. And these this chart here, when we eventually plot where those highest concentration plots of poverty are, these numbers will even be more exaggerated within the city for those rates of poverty. Next. And this is another version of the same. Oh yeah, refugees. Okay, so same thing with the reentry. Especially with the new laws where we're being less of an incarceral society, which is good. As people are coming back, having that support system of what is going to get you by with getting your bills paid, keeping your lights on, being able to get food, and we are talking about making sure that populations that have been unfairly over the years targeted with criminal justice arrests and crimes and lack of support when they are trying to reentry society. This chart kind of shows where some of those rates are, and oftentimes, majority of the time, these are also again in the high poverty targeted areas.
I think there's one more slide, Larry, and it talks about
I think that was what Gina was going to talk about.
Yeah, I think the point here was that there are lots of there's lots of data that supports while some of these populations were selected as our target populations for this GBI pilot, and one of them is around some of the highest domestic violence is, and we know that a lot of that is in the city of Rochester, and so it's just I think it's exacerbated by poverty, and so we are trying to be really thoughtful about how we select some of the populations that we might target for GBI to help maybe support some of these families that are experiencing some of these very troublesome trends.
Right. Also, another thing I want to mention, this is really important for the collective impact of what we're trying to do. $500 isn't going to make anybody super rich, unless you happen to buy, I don't know, a Bitcoin at the right time. But it's really going to be targeted towards people that need it. But also, depending what happens in Washington, D.C., the child tax credit, those single parents or even parents of, if it's a two-parent household or a caregiver household, that tax credit that people are getting every month, child tax credit, which I think is either $300 or $350 per child, depending on their age, in addition to the guaranteed income that we're talking about. If you have one child, a minimum one child, and you're getting this, that's an extra $850 a month that you could be getting once this program starts. If you have multiple children, you know, obviously it's more. And also the federal government has, I think, passed already as part of the American Rescue Plan, or as part of this current legislation, I can't remember, increased amounts for food stamps. So people that are getting help in regards to food, you know, their EBT cards, those amounts will be going up. So there could be all this extra income coming in already to some of these targeted households. Not enough to move you completely out of poverty, but enough to move you really close or up further. And this extra 500 that we're talking about could even move people. I think it will be that extra bump that a lot of people will need to, you know, get themselves even more out of it, or at least in a better circumstance. Another thing with why we are addressing these certain demographics and zip codes and census tracts is you look at the Common Ground report earlier in the year, and a lot of other reports have talked about this across the nation, but here locally, the determinants of poverty and how that is related to health. And, you know, you can literally go from one zip code and, you know, drive 2 miles to another zip code outside the city, and the life expectancy can be 10 or 15 years less. And a lot of that's directly related to poverty, let alone how high poverty affects the education system. So obviously we struggle with in the city. You know, a lot of the problem isn't people not being able to, you know, balance their checkbooks or go online and do that now half the time, but just not literally having enough money to take care of their daily needs. And this can kind of help move that bar up bar down for many people so they can get over that hump. But there is other, you know, with the changes in some of the policies that are going on in our nation, and potentially in New York State, there is extra income that could also be going to some of these families, in addition to what we're doing, and that together, I think will hopefully move the poverty rates down in our city. And this is why that what we're leaning towards is the guaranteed, because it's more targeted as opposed to universal, which kind of helps everybody, but there's less people we could probably do and have impact on because anybody could qualify. And we're thinking guaranteed, some version of guaranteed will be best for our community.
Larry, can I piggyback on that, particularly in talking about lowering poverty rates and just the various issues and pockets in the community that this, just the concept in and of itself could help address. You know, we haven't begun to calculate even cost savings and things like family court and CPS intervention, right? Half of you talk to the experts, half of the, well, I don't want to say half, don't quote me on that, but a large number of CPS interventions around neglect come down to financial resources and just not being able to cover the cost of simple things, right? So versus instead of taking children out of the home and creating, you know, feeding this perpetual cycle of trauma and a lack of resources, you know, to empower parents to lift themselves up.
That's great. So that's the end of our formal presentation. I think what we want to do now is really open it up to questions and, you know, start a dialogue with the community on their thoughts around a guaranteed basic income pilot for Rochester and any ideas they might have to share.
One thing I want to add in before we do that, just I anticipate this question, but where's the money going to come from? Obviously, the city, the budget they just passed, or the proposal that there's a proposal before the city council, which would fund the pilot and a lot of the work of the RUBI for a year or two, depending. I'm not sure exactly of all the details. There's money set aside out of ARPA money, American Rescue Plan Act money, and then eventually one of the hopefully large revenues. And we had some members of the committee that went to Chicago, which saw this happening in Illinois, as the marijuana money, once the cannabis money, once that comes in and it's starting to be taxed, that a large percentage of that money would come and help fund our programs and others. And there's, you know, signs that in other states that's a pretty significant amount of money that could come in. And our idea is, number one, we support affected populations getting those licenses, you know, which is kind of a separate committee, but something that we also want to support, which would help poverty, but also the fact that this would help fund this after the pilot's over.
Yeah, I think Dr. Archie, or it might have been Councilman Patterson on that call, had said something along the lines of revenue during a visit. They discovered that revenue from cannabis sales in 1 year surpassed any other year in terms of alcohol revenue for the city. And I thought that was just a really remarkable point in and of itself. Very promising.
So I think Carlette's going to open up the mic and let people ask questions, and maybe we can also check. I'm not looking at the Facebook comments, so I don't know if there's any comments from.
There's one question so far. Is there a physical application process?
Yeah, no, this is right. We're still in the discussion and the formation phase, and so right now we're taking input to just gauge from the community whether this is something that would be, you know, what people think about this as a concept for our community to try. If it gets to the point where we would implement a pilot, it would be, then we would go to the process and how people could apply, whether it would be through a lottery, you know, how would we identify the first set of recipients. So no physical application as of yet, because we're still in the developmental stages of the pilot.
So Aqua, it looks like what we're going to do, if folks have a question or a comment, they can either use the raise your hand feature here in Zoom or drop a note in the chat and we will turn on your mic.
Okay.
I agree, Hanya. Totally necessary due to our got one of the highest child poverty rates in the country. It's unacceptable.
I think it's 50% in the city of Rochester, the child poverty rates. How will we determine where cannabis is being sold? So that is outside of our pay grade. That is the work that's being done at the state level and then at the local level from a, you know, when the, what do they call it? The Cannabis something board. I think they've just identified how all of that's going to work. I don't have, Nicole, you might have some more information on that. Do you have it?
I was chatting with somebody in the chat.
Okay, I think somebody asked about where cannabis is going to be sold. How will we determine where cannabis will be sold?
So the commission that is currently in formation is going to be working on the regulations and the licensing process, and that will determine who gets a license. But all of that is very much so in the works as we speak.
But
At the New York State level, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
And cities and towns have to opt in to be able to, or either opt in or opt out to being able to have cannabis being sold. But then their boards, they can't say we don't want any shops in our town or city. The city of Rochester has obviously opted into letting there be shops in the city to sell it.
Samantha Everest asked if there are more applicants than funds during the pilot, how will the applicants be chosen?
How would this is great. These are great questions, and I would say, you know, I think my first thought would be, we haven't talked about this, but I said my first thought would probably be, you know, once we got the applicants, if we had more than we have funding for, it would probably be a lottery. But what do you all think? How should we make decisions on who should be recipients of the GBI funding? All right, Carolyn, we will certainly add people with disabilities to the list.
Yep. That's a good idea.
I think I'm just looking at questions.
Well, I see Hannah's in the chat. If Hannah wants to ask.
Okay.
Question,
There's a Bonnie with a question up in the chat too.
Yep. Now Hannah's actually in the, I think she's Carlette let her in. If you want to unmute yourself, I might be saying your name wrong, Ms. Howard or Mr. Howard, but unmute yourself. You can ask a question. You unmuted. Ms. Howard first, or Mr. Howard, Hanya
Okay.
Howard first.
Okay, go ahead. Okay.
And you might have just had a comment that she already made, but I'm not positive.
Bonnie? Oh, nope.
Okay.
There we go.
It's my.
Okay, hi. My name is Hania. You guys wanted me to go first, you said?
Go
Yeah,
ahead,
you-
Hania. That's a
Go.
beautiful name.
Yeah, right. What's my name?
Uh, um, I just think that since we've been in dire straits for so long, it's just phenomenal for someone to finally come out, with a pilot to help everyone. The help is much needed. I just wish that everybody could really get a piece of the pie. I don't like the fact that there are, there's going to be some for people and not for all. I don't really, care for that idea because it's like,
Right.
you get left out. So
Yeah.
hopefully, it'll be, maybe people can rotate it, someone get it for 6 months and someone get it for next 6 months. I just think that, like school, no one should be left behind or something.
Totally agree. I think, and this is, we've been talking to folks across the country that have been doing this work in different areas with very differing needs, right? As a community, just like Rochester has very specific needs that we want to be able to, tailor this initial pilot to, because the whole idea, right, is to start small with a pilot to show that it works, right? To take some of those measurable, quantifiable things like mental health, right? Lowering rates of CPS intervention, lowering crime rates, all of these factors. If we can show that this would be helpful and successful to the community, we can go back, make the argument for more funding and, right, include hopefully, anybody that would possibly qualify. So I totally agree with you there.
And I would just add that the GBI is not an ongoing forever monthly funding. It's really for a set amount of time, Hania. So it could be, our proposal is $500 a month for a year for 500 families. And then potentially the next year, it would be another different 500 families. Or if we were able to scale up, maybe it's 1,000 families or 2,000 families. But the money would be there kind of as a way to give people a lift up so that they could, use it, and that money and that time to invest in themselves and their family, hopefully so that they can begin to find a way to be more economically stable in the longer term. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And hopefully, we can get there with the balance of everything and how, everything's in an uproar at this point. But, it's like when I was younger, I had no help. I had no Section 8. I had no babysitters. People, it's like 7 people are on here. You serious? They need to come out. They need to show up, and they need to know that, people are out here working hard to support them, and, not just be on Facebook for ridiculous stuff. Be here, being educated, and, trying to get some money is going to help them, because RG&E alone, we all know.
Yeah.
It's funny, you mentioned RG&E. I've joked, we're live already, so I guess I got to finish the joke now. But a good part of this money is going to go like to RG&E and local cell phone companies, and Frontier, and it's Wegmans and Tops and Aldi's, and I think most people that are qualified for this, and like we're not going to be buying stocks and overseas accounts and hiding money in like weird places. Well, that's not taxable like we've seen in the news lately. Like this is all going to go right back into your neighborhood and into the local economy. And RG&E is going to get a lot of it probably.
Yeah, and I think some of the things that we've heard when we've seen what other cities have done and they've looked at where people spend their money. I mean, sometimes individuals have used it to go back to school. They have that space now where maybe they enroll in some kind of a program to up their skills and they get better jobs, or they might put their children in some kind of music program, sports program, things that they may not have had discretionary income to do, but they know that this is income that they have for a while, and they give their, they invest in their kids. Some people use it to maybe to repair their vehicles, or to, like Larry said, just make sure that they have the basics covered for their in their budget. So food and housing and childcare, transportation, those basics that we know that people need. So the money will kind of certainly turn right back in the community. And I think that's also a boost to the economics in our community, right? So, because it'll probably mostly sit right here. It's not going to go to anybody's offshore account. So that could say that there's some economic benefit to our community as well. Yeah, I think we
Bonnie's
have two
next.
raised hands. Who's next?
Bonnie's already in to ask a question.
Oh, Bonnie?
Yep.
Can we unmute Bonnie so she can ask her question?
Okay, is that all right now?
Yes.
Okay. I started to say thank you for having this. Of course, if we didn't have the goddamn virus, it would be, I think, even more lively, shall we say, with an open meeting with everybody. So that's something, these kinds of things require a lot of discussion, even though they appear positive, and which doesn't mean they're not. But I think people have a real need to express on these kinds of issues. I have, not that I'm any kind of expert on it, but I have some familiarity with the concept of basic income. I remember a good number of years ago that when this first got introduced, people were saying, well, they're going to misuse their money, they're going to buy this and buy that. But there's been studies, I don't know if there's recent ones, but there's been studies indicating that was not the case. I mean, there's no perfect system, but it was not the usual. So that may be something that people are thinking that they don't necessarily want to say. So my couple concerns I have. One is you already touched on. I think I already touched on was to what extent can we be careful about if I assume many of these folks will be getting services, food stamps and all this from other places. And even though we may have some kind of agreement that locally that won't interfere with the basic income, I would wonder, and this, I would wonder if that's going to necessarily over time politically stand up, because what you see so much, I hate to even say this out loud because it really is so depressing, is that we can't even get the federal government approved for these critical, absolutely life-threatening and quality of life approval without going through a terrible back and forth that is very angry. I do wonder, and if I think it was said that the program is going to be somewhat time limited, so that may take care of some of that. But I can see politicians, starting to not maybe right away, starting to, well, you have money now, you don't need to have food stamps or whatever. So it's just, there's not a magic wand for that, but I think it's worthwhile saying it out loud. I hate to say that people can be of that mentality, but they probably are. The other thing I wanted to say would be something that would be much more of concern if this were to be especially if it would be a national approach for a long term, and that is if you look around the world, or at least in our country for sure, that the types of jobs we have, it seems to me, have shrunk. Not just the manufacturing jobs are an obvious thing, but if you look at Rochester, we have so few really, how can I say this, quality and motivating small businesses. We have restaurants and we have my unfavorite thing, the dollar stores. But we don't have a lot of other, and I think there's been some, conversation, not just locally, but across the country and other places, about the risk of kind of an end to work. Now, not a literal end to work, but it seems it's a lot of some of the technology, which is good. Some of it is replacing jobs, replacing people in a lot of ways. And the lines between that get really, really kind of mushed up. And I would like to see us, and this is something in the housing thing I was going to talk about, that I would like to see us really start to make a commitment for use of some of the old buildings in the city to be used for various work, and not just, you know, this low super income, low income kind of job, but something more in the middle where people are, you know, taught skills, and whether you can have a job that has meaning to you and has a community sense. And I'm a big supporter of co-ops because I've had some experience with them, and they're extremely you know, valuable, and they bring people together, and they provide a service. So just a quick note here, because I don't know if I can come here tomorrow, is that we did a proposal. When I say we, I belong to the Northeast Neighborhood Community Council, which is a grassroots group of a number of neighborhood groups together. And so there was a posting. I don't know if you guys saw this. There was a posting from the city. It probably goes back quite a few months now. From, I guess there was some HUD money someplace, and they asked for proposals. So the proposal that, and it was very short notice, the proposal that we put together was for use of an older building to create a skill and a place for doing repairs. Rochester has 40% of the housing in Rochester needs repairs, and it's mostly in the low and moderate, that's where I live, by the way, area. And it's so sad because these are people that, you know, have homes that are more affordable to begin with, but also they've, you know, many of them have lived there a long time. Even if they haven't, it's a way of people being able to open up to go into a housing that they don't have to go bankrupt for. And but if you know, these are 100-year-old houses. Most all the houses, third oldest housing stock in the country is Rochester. So when you go into these areas, you know, people try to do the best, but it's costly, and you can't expect 100-year-old houses, as well as these were made. Believe me, they were made well. And expect that you're not going to have repair needs. So the image here would be there happens to be a couple older buildings near where we are.
Hey, Bonnie,
Yeah, I'm
I just want
sorry.
to say, no, you're making some good points, but just, I know the Housing Reparations Committee, even if you can't make the call, maybe you could write out that question. Because I mean, they've dug deeply into that work. So I'd hate for us to give you any kind of answer or thought where I have
Well,
some
that's all
thoughts on
right.
that.
I actually could give them. I said I did the proposal we did. I could send it to them if I knew.
Oh, that's great.
Rock
And
Ruby.
yeah, Rock
email.
Ruby was the Rock Ruby. I forgot the email. We can put it in the chat, Bonnie. And I have your name, so I will make sure that I make sure that they get that from you if you don't get the email, because I think some of what you're talking about actually is part of some of the work that we've seen in other cities. I think Evanston, for instance, part of their reparations work offers money for people who have lived in areas where they were either their families were redlined historically, or they were displaced, and they can use the money for repairs on their houses. So I think that's where I think you're going is very much in line with some of the work that the Housing Reparations Subcommittee is looking at.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know the details of this, but the other night on the radio, I heard about a program in Chicago that actually started out to be a kind of a bad punishment thing, and then it just didn't happen that way. So they ended up with a fair amount of money that they meaning the people who live in the homes, are now using at very low interest to do some repairs.
Yep.
It's so critical, because you find what neighbors say when they're speaking honestly to you. They say nobody really cares about us, because they think, well, if they have a home, that's better than not having a home. So, you know, we just kind of keep going along, where it's very painful. And the other thing just to throw in here is that, you know, we need to take care of our trees on the, because one of the things that's happening is that I talked to the forest man from the city. He seems like a really delightful person, but he said they keep cutting the staff. So some of the things that you see, if you look at trees, you know, they're vital out. I'm sure I don't tell anybody about the environment. But they are not always well cared for, and people need trees trimmed to keep them healthy in backyards. Nobody can afford $1,000 trimming on a tree.
Nope, I totally agree. I
Yeah.
paid that for,
So-
I live in the city and I had to do that last year. It can be very expensive. That's a really good suggestion though, is around not only the house, but also your yard. And some of those costs, that's a really good those are really good comments. Thank you, Bonnie, so much for your comments and your input. I would love to see if there is somebody else. I know we have a couple other people who are interested as well. Carlette, can you let someone else ask a question? Hi, Stacy.
Hi, Stacy.
No, Stacy?
She's got to unmute herself.
Oh,
I'm trying to.
you were good, Stacy. You unmuted yourself and then you remuted yourself.
Yeah, we heard you for a second.
Try again.
I'm
There you go.
sorry. Can you hear
That's
me
okay.
now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
I'm not very technologically savvy.
Well, you
got
figured
here,
it out.
so you're good enough.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you for your patience. I guess my question would be, I think this would be an amazing program. Unfortunately, I'm 3 houses into Irondequoit outside of the city. I myself, I live almost 400% below poverty. And it's very frustrating. And I know that the need is out there. At the end of the year, if that's what the term, you know, what the council decides or whoever the committee decides, will the program be evaluated as to the people that are receiving the money? I know we're not asking how we're spending it or how they are spending it, but did it give them that leg up that we're looking for it to be used for, I guess is my question. You know,
Yeah.
Did it help? You know,
That the
Did it
intent is,
work?
yeah, your question is great. So the intent is to do some type of an evaluation. When we've looked at other cities, they have done things like have a monthly just check-in and say, you know, how are you doing compared to last month? You know, are you more content? Do you feel less stressed? So, you know, it could be like an ongoing series of questions. It could be a beginning and an end, like an assessment at the beginning of the period and then kind of at the end of the period to see, you know, what has changed. I don't know that we've decided what the measurement would be, but I do think that we agree that there needs to be some kind of an assessment. Although what I will tell you is when we looked at other cities' work, the outcomes and the assessments were very similar. Like most cities have outcomes from people that have participated by saying that people are better off a year after into this program than they were before. They feel less stress. They have more confidence.
Psychologically wise,
Yes.
to have that extra money and to know that they can go to Wegmans and not have to really pinch their pennies as much. I mean, a head of lettuce was $1.70 today at Wegmans. I almost fell over. You know?
Yeah.
My other question is, and would it be possible, because of, you know, your bullet points as to who would be eligible for this, and I guess I didn't even think about a 16-year-old being the head of a household, but do they know how to balance a checkbook? And because I did not learn that stuff in school, thank God I have a sister that was able to teach me that. you know, but those are things that are important too, that also would probably do wonders for mental health, you know.
Yeah.
Along.
I can speak
Go
to
ahead.
that a little bit. I, as a part of my function in this committee, have been talking to the folks in Hudson, New York, that have a guaranteed income. Well, what does she call it? It's specifically, they were calling, because it's essentially a UBI adjacent program, but in terms of how it's actually executed and the mapping of it all, it's guaranteed income. And one thing she emphasized, as well as the folks, the national organization, the Mayors for Guaranteed Income, was in order for both the people participating in the program to have ongoing success and the pilot programs themselves to be successful, there needs to be an on-the-ground sort of social work customer service team that is working very closely with the recipients, in terms of, you know, looking out for that benefits cliff to make sure that they're not going to lose any of their benefits, kind of like how Bonnie touched on, and also providing similar support that you were just describing, right? Like what are things that we can do to sort of round out and equip folks participating in the program perpetually, or in perpetuity rather, and some of that would be that kind of counseling, and again, like making sure they're working very closely so that their, you know, SNAP benefits are protected, and other things like that. So, and I hear you on the, you know, we fully recognize that that poverty isn't limited to the city of Rochester, and that's the facts are out there, the statistics are out there. We know that's the case, and I don't think, you know, this just happens to be an exploratory program and pilot program that the city of Rochester is looking at. Hopefully, you know, someday in the future we'll have a national program and, you know, maybe even a county-wide one. But I totally hear you and recognize that the poverty struggle is real beyond the city limits.
Okay.
Thank you very much for
Thank you.
listening to my question.
No, thank you for participating, Stacy. Carlette, do we have anything else? Is there anything on Facebook? Do we answer the Facebook question?
I know Carolyn had a question. Oh, the Facebook question. Do you feel it's giving parents the money is to help child, a good way to help child poverty? Well, I mean, if somebody's emancipated at 16 over, they could get it, but obviously we can't give money directly to children, just legally. You know, there's no mechanism. But you know, if the question, I'm not sure for the intent is behind the question of Facebook, but if the worry is, you know, if we're giving money to parents and they're not actually spending it to, you know, help the child and help themselves become more comfortable, and they're spending it frivolously, like Nicole has said, there's lots of evidence from other communities that that's very rarely happens.
Yeah. And I think the belief in the research would show that if you give money to parents, most of the time they spend it on their family, or needs of their family. So I believe that by giving money to parents or single parents, that the beneficiaries of it will most likely be the children.
Right. And to piggyback on that, I mean, when you hear sort of the national promotion around programs, UBI adjacent programs, you know, really the idea is to be micromanaging people's money less, right? We don't do it to rich people, and doing it to poor people, we have evidence every single, it doesn't help. It doesn't fix things. When you're facing income insecurity, housing insecurity, food insecurity, it limits your worldview. It has mental health impacts, no matter, you know, how you started out, that cause you to worry about these things day in and day out. And to Arthur's point, the idea here is to equip people so that we see some of these. I did want to mention some of the measuring sticks, if you will, and the variables that Cameron Burns from Mayors for Guaranteed Income had listed off. And this isn't all inclusive, just to name a few. And obviously there's more that are specific to Rochester, but it's, you know, what does their physical functioning look like before and after having participating in a program like this? Mental health, income volatility, spending, consumption, employment, education, family dynamics and parenting like we discussed, stress and coping that was just mentioned, hope and mattering. So, feeling that you have a purpose and your mental health isn't declining and people aren't getting into things that aren't good for them. And again, household food security and obviously COVID variables as well. But, that doesn't get into the whole gun violence rates that make Rochester pretty, unfortunately, unique on the map as well.
I think
Also
the thing too, I was just going to say, I think the thing too is that, my personal belief is that poor people don't spend money any more frivolously than anyone else, that it's a fallacy to believe that poor people don't know how to manage their money. I think the reality is that poor people don't have enough money to manage. So, giving people who have less financial resources, additional financial resources to cover some of those gaps in their basic budgets is important. And, I just think fundamentally differently that it's not about poor spending habits or not being able to budget. It's about not having enough and having to make some impossible decisions about what to spend their money on, and God forbid anything catastrophic happens or something happens where there is just kind of an unplanned expense that sends you down a hole that is really hard to dig out of.
And there's been previous programs and a lot of programs in the community, in the city, in the county, where there's been we're going to teach people how to balance checkbooks. We'll do better, help you with your credit, do all this work to help you better manage your money. But there was no extra money involved, and it ends up at the end, 6 months later, a year later, how are people that were taking part in these programs that were in poverty doing financially? And a lot of the time, they weren't all that much better off. They didn't have any more money. They didn't have extra money to spend to pay what they needed. So it wasn't a fact of, okay, we fixed all these issues. Now you know how to take care of your money. If there's $83 in your account at the beginning of the month and negative 12 at the end, all that work, all that planning, all that education isn't going to help. And that was really the need that was not being addressed.
Yep. I think we have a question. Is Carolyn? Carolyn, can you unmute yourself and maybe ask your question?
Thanks. I got stuck adding me as a panelist.
Sorry.
I guess my first question is, we have seen there's a lot of research that's come in from other parts of the country and even the world, and these pilots have been successful. So I'm wondering why we're doing a pilot instead of going right ahead and doing this. I think it's pretty obvious the poverty here is really bad and it needs to be remedied. So that would be my first question. And then sort of to follow up, if it has to be a pilot, which I think we have enough research to go right ahead and dive right in on radically addressing poverty in our community. But so then if it has to be a pilot, what are we doing to make sure that this legislation and recommendation and that the way this is done in such a way that it is sustainable and something that is able to quickly be funneled into actually doing this, right?
So I would say, first of all, your question is spot on. And I get asked that very same question, Carolyn, a lot, with people saying, how many times do you have to assess whether this is good or not? Because I haven't seen, there's been no studies that I've seen that says that giving people more money, if they're poor especially, is a bad thing. So I agree with you. I think the reality is that we're piloting so that we can get the mechanisms right, so that we can understand how to scale it up, and to make sure that if we scale it, when we scale it up, it is sustainable. So we have, my understanding is right now there has been some funds that have been earmarked from the ARPA dollars that are coming to the city that have been kind of earmarked. And I think this came across in a DNC article, so that's not, it's not like a secret. And if we do the program that we have identified, it will probably cover 1,000 families for about 2 years, maybe a little bit less. We might have to scale it back a little bit. And then the idea is, for sustainability, might we be able to use some of the funds that are coming from the cannabis, the new cannabis revenue, to then sustain this program for a longer term and scale it up. So scale it up to be more families for more than like 2 years. And so the pilot would give us time to make sure that we know how to implement a program, that we have the systems in place to make sure that it works, and that we, address some of the things that Larry was talking about, like the benefits cliff, to make sure that families aren't harmed financially who are able to take advantage of this, and that we have a way that is sustainable into the future. So that would kind of be the reasons for the pilot. I don't think there's any doubt. I haven't heard any that there's any downside necessarily for giving people more money. The thing that we just have to be careful is that they're not harmed with getting their benefits. Families aren't harmed with getting fewer benefits if they're able to receive this money.
Thank you so much for your candor. Right? Yeah, this is obviously working. And I guess my next thing would be to say, let's make sure, what strategies are in place to bring the incoming administration into this conversation, so that, I'm really thrilled to see that Mayor Warren, did sign on to mayors for UBI. Can we invite incoming Mayor Evans to also sign on to that? Is anyone from his administration, incoming administration in these, just making sure that this doesn't get dropped, as we switch teams coming in. And I think it's really important to be educating the incoming administration on why this works, that it does work, and, making them a part of it so that we're not losing all of your wonderful work on this, as sort of new strategies and visions come in.
I will say one thing, as you know, Carolyn, and, I think a lot of us that know Malik and can reach out to him. I'm definitely going to talk to him about it, but he is on city council. So he will be, he's a part of this process and we'll be voting on it. And knowing Malik, he's not afraid to ask questions, any concerns he has. So I think it's, with our change in mayorship, it is, I think as this work goes on, the fact that he is already part of the decision-making process, bodes good for us going forward. But, the devil is in the details, but he will be voting on this. And if he has concerns, I'm sure he'll be bringing them up.
And
I think that there's been, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just saying, I have heard from a number of folks that he is interested in exploring this. So I think, I know on a personal level, and I've heard my colleagues on our subcommittee here say this as well, we plan to continue to be resources beyond the current mayor's tenure. And it's absolutely going to be our priority, as well as clearly incoming legislators like yours, to make sure that ball isn't dropped. So totally agree there.
One last question I had was, in any of the research and pilots that y'all have looked at, I'm wondering, and I'm not suggesting we do this here, but I'm wondering if any of the guaranteed income projects were focused on a specific neighborhood or sort of area to sort of study just the effects on the revitalization of a specific community. Have you seen that? Has anybody done that? Again, I don't think we should do that here. I think we should focus on who needs it most, but I would be curious to see what happens to a neighborhood when the neighborhood receives a guaranteed income.
I don't know that I've seen anything specifically on a neighborhood. I mean, I would say probably the thing that might be closest is Alaska has a UBI program, Carolyn. So, for Alaska, every adult over 18 gets their permanent, what do we call that fund? Their permanent fund. They get up to $2,000 a year, but it's for the whole state if you're an adult. So that would probably be, one, you can look at it from a state level. Hudson, New York is a pretty small community, and they're doing I think that, Nicole, do you know how many people were in their pilot? Was it 25 families or 25 individuals? It
25.
was pretty small, but it's a very small community. And helping that one pretty closely too, Carolyn, to see, what they're finding in a small community. I don't know of anything that's been specific to a neighborhood or a zip code specifically. So it is interesting, but I don't know of any studies. I mean, I don't know of any work that's been taken to that level.
I remember, I can't say which particular report off the top of my head, but I know there have been places that have tried to target certain zip codes, like we talked about census tracts, high poverty census tract zip codes in certain neighborhoods and cities. But I don't know if they've ever said we're just giving it to, the ABC neighborhood or 19th Ward or just Northeast. I don't know if anything's ever been that specific that I've noticed. Sometimes if the money is coming from grants, like from a foundation, it could be that specific. But when it's taxpayer money, we can't necessarily say only these 3 streets get something, to qualify for the program. I don't think that would fly politically. But concentrating, on census tracts and higher poverty zip codes was kind of, or span the city, I think could work.
Would you forgive me one more thing?
Go ahead, Carolyn. Yeah, sure.
Thanks. Okay, well, I don't know, you might have 15 people in the queue, I don't know. I did put this in the chat, but, also urge you to include people with disabilities in that list.
Yeah.
They face a particular benefits cliff in that they actually can lose their benefits if they work, even a little bit, which leaves them unable to they choose between, supporting themselves or losing the little bit of support that they have, and also makes them very vulnerable to abuse by employers. A guaranteed income would not affect a disability qualification because it's not considered work. And so this is, also intersects with both our homeless and our mental health populations. And so I just didn't see them on the list. And I think, they're particularly vulnerable as far as people who are living in poverty.
That's a good ad.
Thanks, y'all.
You're welcome.
And I will say, in terms of, I haven't had a chance to update my colleagues on the subcommittee yet, but one of the other things that came up with Joan Hunt with the program in Hudson was the fact that there is existing state legislation out there, and there needs to be some additional state legislation to sort of help do some patchwork support temporarily in terms of the benefits cliff and making it easier to execute on these programs and have less hiccups along the way. And obviously most of the benefit programs are at the federal level. So even if we can do something in the immediate future on the state level to, I don't want to use the word loopholes here, obviously, but to, provide that extra layer of protection until there's something more unified in place.
Oh, that's good to know. We should make sure we understand what that legislation is so that we can kind of lift it up.
We're researching it in Assemblywoman Clark's office as we speak.
Very good. I knew there was a reason we liked you, Nicole.
That's right.
Carla, anything else we should be paying attention to?
Nope. I think,
Carlette's the quiet storm. She's making all this stuff happen behind the scenes. Anything else, Larry, on Facebook?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the Facebook now.
the same
go ahead.
one, and I was asking if she could hop on in the Zoom, she could talk, but I think you did answer her question.
Yeah, Susan. Yeah, we answered Susan's in the Facebook.
A lot of really good feedback.
Yeah, this is really good. Very helpful. If there are no more questions, and if my esteemed colleagues don't have any more comments, I will, maybe we have exhausted today's discussion. We are certainly open for future dialogue, and we would love to continue to get input and feedback. So if you can use the rockruby.com email address, I think, is that the email address? Now I lost it.
Yeah.
And
The City of Rochester, I think.
oh, okay, the rockruby@thecityofrochester.gov email address to send us any feedback or thoughts or input. That would be awesome. We are not finished with our recommendations yet. This is our community input gathering time, and so we really just want to make sure that we hear from lots of people as we start to finalize what our recommendation will be. So please continue to provide us with that feedback. And I would just turn it over to Larry or Nicole for any last thoughts.
really great feedback. We're just starting to, scrape it's just the tip of the iceberg. So I hope everyone continues to participate. Thank you in particular, County Legislator-elect Carolyn Delvecchio. We'll definitely be looping you in on those conversations. And yeah, I'm actually gonna also drop I mean, Facebook can't see it, but can I still drop my name in the chat? I was gonna put my email out. There it is. I'm gonna put my, I'm Chief of Staff to Assemblywoman Sarah Clark. So if anyone needs anything in this vein or wants to have a one-on-one discussion, I'd be happy to do that as well. And I'm dropping my email in the chat. Larry?
Just want to add thank you for everybody who sat in through all this, or most of it. I know I lost a few minutes ago, but if you're on Facebook or Twitter, if you could like retweet the link to this, the Facebook link, if you just retweet it, it'll be up on our Facebook page. I think within the hour, the whole video, once it's completed, just so if people weren't able to make it, they could see it. It'll also be a copy will be on the RUBI website of the discussion. But hopefully, you can share it and maybe more people can watch it that weren't able to get on today.
Oh, thank you, Hania.
Thank you, Hania. That's wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Have a really good night. And Carlette, thank you for all your support.
Thanks, Carlette.
Thanks, guys. Have a great night.
Bye.